Wow, it's awesome to be here, and I think those of you who were at the first two Startup Lessons Learned conference can agree that those were definitely MVPs compared to what we have going on here, so I want to thank everyone for having me. So, I'm really looking forward. This is a talk I've never given on a topic that I've wanted to talk about for a long time, and this, if you walk away with one thing you will learn, even being a VC does not protect you from making really boneheaded mistakes as an entrepreneur. So I want to talk a little bit about the experience I've had. As Eric mentioned, I have two jobs. I'm a partner at SoftTech VC with Jeff Clavier. I'm also the founder and CEO of a company called Bionic Panda Games. We started off life as a company that was 100% focused on the Android platform. I'm going to talk to you a bit about what we learned from that decision and some things that went right and wrong along the way. So I think, everyone, when you start a startup, the world does not need another startup. The question that every startup has to ask itself is, why do we exist and why should anyone care? And at the time that we started our company in 2010, the world was already awash in mobile games companies. I think some of the leading edge people had seen what was happening on Facebook and were already beginning to migrate away from Facebook and towards mobile. So my co-founder, he and I had worked together in a company that was acquired by Zynga. We were sitting around and we said, we don't want to be yet another mobile social games company. We want to do something different. And we looked at the landscape, and the one thing that was clear was that a lot of the really smart people we knew were working on iOS. And we said, what could we do that would be fun, interesting, different, and really impactful if it worked out? And we looked around, and my co-founder pulled out his Nexus 1, which at the time was the state-of-the-art of Android phones. And we went to the Google Play Store, which was then the Android market, and we said, why aren't there any good games for this platform? This is crazy. At the time, Android was definitely the ugly stepchild of operating systems on mobile. The devices weren't very good. The consumer experience for buying wasn't very good, and there just weren't that many devices out there. But talk about looking into the future, we said, geez, this can't persist. Eventually, the checkout experience will get better. Eventually, the devices will get better. And eventually, there'll be hundreds of millions of people on this platform. When all those things converge, Android's going to be really interesting. So we decided that we would take a close look at it. And I think we decided after a lot of weekends that we were going to focus on Android. For a lot of the reasons I mentioned, we thought that all of those three things would converge. But there was one really interesting side benefit of taking a contrarian approach. We were able to describe ourselves as the Android guys. We were going to be the guys who were going to go out there on this brave new world of Android, and we were going to figure it out. And I think if any of you out there are thinking about recruiting or thinking about how do I get people excited about my startup, one thing that can really help with all those things is having a really different approach. When we would tell people we were working on Android, they would either recoil in horror, laugh, or give us these very quizzical looks as to why are you doing that? But that really had the effect of separating the people who sort of had our vision about what we thought Android could turn into from those who were just looking to work at any old games company. And for us, it turned out to be a really strong identifier for our company by attaching kind of a big part of our corporate identity to the platform we were working on. And it was a really good motivator for our team. And I really do want to highlight the fact that in retrospect, we kind of made it sound like it's a trivial decision. Platform choices really matter. And I know a lot of folks in the audience are technical, and you're thinking, well, of course it matters, because Android and iOS are different operating systems, different tools and tech. That's only, in my vision, a third of what really matters. Of course, the tech stack matters. But there's two other things that really do matter when you pick a platform. One is distribution. The iTunes Store and the Google Play market are not the same. And I would challenge anyone here who's looked at any two competing platforms, whether that's building for Facebook or for the open web, or you pick your poison. Distribution is really platform dependent. So choosing a platform is also choosing a distribution strategy and choosing what you're going to learn about what works. And the last piece is really design. It's really hard to design something that works equally well on Android and iOS because the devices are different, the consumer experience and expectations are different. And so when across any platform you're thinking about, choosing that platform has all these ripple repercussions about what your company is going to turn into, what you're going to learn, and who you're going to hire. So I want to talk about why we pivoted. So we spent a year grinding away on Android. There's all these problems. There's fragmentation. There's devices that weren't quite good enough. There were cranky consumers. But ultimately, two things happened. One, try as hard as we could not quite get the monetization on Android to be as high as we needed it to do. To Drew's point, to kind of hit that ceiling. We looked at the kind of company we wanted to build. We looked at the numbers we had on Android, and we said, we're not going to get there alone. And two, a funny thing happened. We built a game that had a social feature where you could share with your friends that you were playing the game. And the number one thing we started getting from our users was, when are my friends on iOS at school, because it was largely school-aged children, going to be able to play your game? So we looked at those two things and said, gosh, we really have to take a really hard look at iOS. And I really wanted to just give you all kind of 5 questions we asked ourselves when we were thinking about making our big platform pivot, because I think they're really important to ask yourself, especially if you're a startup. One is, do I actually have the resources to pull this off? 2, do I have the right team and people around the table to actually switch gears? 3, how long is it going to take for me to learn this new platform in terms of distribution, development, and monetization? We thought it would take 6 months. It took more like a year. And last but not least, before you make a big platform pivot, ask yourself, what will happen if I continue with my current strategy? Because I think changing platforms is one of the most disruptive things you can do to your own company in terms of your current trajectory. So we decided ultimately, instead of trashing everything we had done on Android, I thought this was a pretty fitting picture for what we tried to do. We tried to take the knowledge we had of the Android platform and leverage that into an emerging position on iOS and Kindle Fire. And so I wish I could tell you how the story ends, but we're still in the middle of it. So if anyone has questions about platform pivots later, I'll probably try to talk you out of it, but feel free to ask me questions. Thank you very much.